From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome to the show, my great friend, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. He's running this great initiative, America's New Majority Project. His latest book is March to the Majority, the real story of the Republican Revolution. Newt, welcome. Best to Ambassador Callista. Newt, did you see the Reagan movie yet, by chance?
No, I haven't. I've seen the ad for it, but not the movie.
It's fabulous. It's
by the way, Callista asked me to say hi to you.
God, I love Callista. She's such a wonderful woman. Ambassador Callista, the best of the best. Yeah, Judy and I saw it last night. It's very good. It was very good. I mean, you know, all the left-wing critics are panning it, and they're calling it, you know, just hagiography, you know, it's all, you know, Reagan worship. But really, I call it historiography. You're a historian, too. It's a very accurate, it's from Paul Kengor's book, it's a very accurate depiction of his life and how he crusaded to destroy Soviet communism and how he built up the economy, and it runs through his, you know, he kicked out the communists from the Screen Actors Guild. Anyway, it's worth seeing. It's a couple hours, definitely worth seeing. I want to get to your great column about Kennedy, but let me just ask you for a moment about the Kamala Harris interview on CNN. What'd you think?
Well, I mean, start with the way they set it up. I mean, you talked about Reagan, who, of course, both was a movie star and was surrounded by people who understood the importance of visuals. The whole setting was wrong. Her hair was wrong. The color she was wearing was wrong. Positioning her so she's the furthest away from the camera, which made her look much smaller than she really is, and made Waltz look bigger than he really is. I mean, there's a whole series of things there. Ben Domenech in the transom wrote this like 6 paragraphs of all the different things that were wrong just with the staging. Beyond that, I thought it was very interesting that she said, "I haven't changed." Now, considering that they spent the last few weeks trying to move her to the center and saying she's changed on fracking and she's changed on the border and so forth, and now she comes back and you're watching her in her own words say, "No, I believe what I've always believed." Well, if you go back and look at what she's always believed, she is a San Francisco radical. I mean, she's the essence of big government socialism combined with really strange social values. And I do, by the way, think that's true. I think that's who she really is.
Why'd she keep looking down? You know, if you and I are having a conversation and I'm always looking down, I think it means that I can't look you in the face. I can't look you in the eyes. I can't, I'm not telling the truth.
I don't know if it's true, but several people suggested to me yesterday that she actually had notes.
Oh. Huh.
She was looking down because she must have known in advance what the questions were probably going to be.
Huh.
And she had notes for how to answer each question.
Wow.
Which is a continuation of the sort of Joe Biden model.
You know, it was supposedly an hour taping, and we only saw 18 minutes. I mean,
I think that's all they got. It may have taken an hour to set it up, et cetera, but if you watch them, and I don't think Dana Bash did a terrible job, but she clearly wasn't very aggressive. And she set up softballs to, allow each of them, both Waltz, who I've decided is kind of the equivalent of a personal support candidate. I've suggested that if you think about personal support pets, that Trump should actually allow her to have Waltz on stage with her at the debate. Now, don't let him say anything. You need to at least pat her on the shoulder, reassure her, make her feel good.
give her a little pat on the rear end.
No. She's presidential material. She gets a pat on the shoulder.
That's right, pat on the shoulder.
Whatever happened earlier in her life, she's up to the shoulder now. But the whole, and then of course Waltz. What I was sort of struck by is he is just a total liar. I mean, Bash gives him an opportunity to admit that he lied about being in combat, and he just can't do it. He goes into something about, well, my wife says that sometimes I use grammar badly. Well, no, that wasn't a question of grammar. He implied clearly that he had used a gun in combat, period. But he also had implied that he was a command sergeant major, which he was not, period. Earlier in his career, he implied that the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce had given him an award, which they wrote him a letter saying, take this out of your campaign literature. It is not true. So every time you turn around, Waltz has some weird component to it.
You know, it just seemed to me, her answers, let's take fracking, for example. I mean, she talks so much about climate change and then she tried to worm her way through, well, I said in 2020, no fracking, that I would not be for a ban on fracking. People looked that up. She didn't. She never talked about it in the debate. But the bigger point is what she said about climate change. She's a radical on climate change. Right. So, you know, if she were elected, it seems to me, Newt, the Biden-Harris policy, which is a war against fossil fuels, you know, attempts to stop fracking, stop drilling, stop leasing, stop building LNG plants, that would just continue. I don't care, you know, whether she has a ban on fracking misses the point. The bigger point is she would continue the war against fossil fuels. Well,
she would bankrupt Western Pennsylvania, which sits on 2 of the 4 largest natural gas reserves in the world. Literally 2 out of the 4 biggest in the world are in Western Pennsylvania. And they're a source of enormous number of jobs and income and wealth. And that's why she's fudging, because she knows if everybody in Western Pennsylvania understands she wants to put them out of business, she's going to lose the state. And if she loses the state, she loses the election. I mean, it's really that simple.
By the way, no, I'm sorry, please. No, you go ahead.
I'm working on a whole model about corruption and waste in government. If you look at the number of billions that the Biden-Harris administration has been giving to the auto industry to convert to electric cars, and the fact that all the manufacturers are starting to back away from it because nobody wants to buy them. I mean, now, unless the government's going to coerce you, which is what they're trying to do, they're trying to make it illegal to manufacture a car. So they're not going to tell you you have to buy an electric car. It's just there won't be any cars left except electric cars. So, you know, which is, if you look at about 10% of the country thinks 90% of the country wants to have either a traditional car or a hybrid car, but not an electric car. And we have literally given away billions of dollars. I think Ford alone got $3 billion and has now decided not to do it. And I'm trying to find out, does that mean they have to pay the money back? I mean, I think there's enough corruption and waste that you get about a third to halfway to a balanced budget just by not being stupid.
Ford, you're right, they pulled back. No more electric SUVs. They said they lost $1.9 billion. But your point is interesting. How much of that was government assistance, government subsidies?
Right. Well, and you have to also ask the question, if the government gives Intel, for example, the money to build a chip factory, does the government then get a shared profit from the chip factory? Or is this just free cash? I mean, because you're talking about billions. I mean, this dwarfs their ability to throw money away on individual people. And they do it across the board. I mean, this whole that the government should take your money, and because the government bureaucrat is smarter than the marketplace, the government bureaucrat should then spend your money getting the social values you're not willing to pay for. And it's really an amazingly stupid model. It'd be one thing to say, we are going to pre-purchase for the Defense Department $5 billion from Intel, and we'll give them the money in advance to build the factory, but then they owe us chips worth $5 billion. That would at least be a rational investment of money. Instead, currently, what the deal is, let me hand my good friends $5 billion, and hopefully they'll get a factory built, and we'll be all better off because there's a factory built. Well, I think that's a pretty stupid way to run the economy.
By the way, on the Intel story, Intel, which was once a great company but no longer is, they were given roughly $11 billion from the CHIPS Act. and they announced that they were building a plant overseas. Actually, not in Asia, believe it or not, in Europe. I mean, so they're taking money and building a plant overseas. Wow. I mean, and of course, Intel's stock has collapsed because they're not making any money because they're not the great company they used to be. You know, Newt, one other thing with Kamala, she doubled down. I know you when we talked on TV, her speech before the convention speech, her so-called economic speech, where she talked about price gouging and spending $2 trillion on various things, she doubled down on that in that interview. She doubled down on the price controls, for example, on the rent controls, on the $25,000 subsidy to homeowners, which of course would just jack up prices. She doubled down on all of that. Now that's got to be, you know, Trump's going to tear her apart for that, it seems to me.
Well, he should. I mean, part of the problem Trump has, she has so many proposals that are stupid that it's really hard to figure out which ones to make a priority in getting the country to understand how bad it is. I mean, when you think about her proposal, which candidly I don't see how they'd implement, to have a tax on unrealized capital gains in housing. Now, in the long run, that will be a threat to every person because while they claim they're only going to start with really rich people and really big houses, everybody knows at a common sense level, once the government starts down a certain road, sooner or later it goes after the middle class because that's where the money is. And the idea that you're going to have to try to figure out, did you have an unrealized capital gain last year on a house you're not selling? And should you then pay a tax to the government even though you don't have any transaction to generate the money? And if you can't pay the tax, could the government then seize your house? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that nightmares are made of.
You know, her tax proposals, which are in Joe Biden-Harris budget, on corporations and on capital gains and dividends, an investor will wind up paying close to 60% on capital gains and or dividends. That's all in. Plus, obviously, if you have fewer profits, that will damage wage earners enormously. Wage earners shoulder up to 70% of the corporate tax burden. That work was done by Kevin Hassett and Democrat Alan Auerbach. I mean, these things have to come out. They got to be pounded away. And she doubled down on it. I mean, basically, she just, you know, she didn't sound like a centrist or moderate to me, Newt. I guess that's the big point.
Well, no, she's not. I mean, she is a genuine San Francisco radical. She's a genuine big government socialist. But remember, we have to get better at explaining at a personal level. If the stock market collapses and you have 401ks or you have a pension fund which is invested in the stock market, this is going to hurt every American's retirement plan. So in addition to the impact on the economy in general, it has a very particular impact on every single American who is, in one way or another, investing in America as part of their retirement plan. And it's to me, if you actually implemented everything she has talked about, you would guarantee a Great Depression.
Yeah, there's about 130 million, some odd, investors. And they, you know, vastly the middle class. The middle class sums are smaller than the top 1%. But everybody, you're right, everybody is in the market one way or another. IRAs, 401ks, even union pension funds. Those union guys don't understand how it's crippled their pension funds.
Well, that's right, and that's up to us to communicate that she's not only against entrepreneurs, she's against you. Whoever you are. She's against you in wanting to force you into an electric car. She's against you in raising the price of energy. She's against you in crippling the stock market so your retirement fund goes down and you have less money to retire on. I mean, if people fully understood what Kamala Harris stood for, they'd realize that she's a nightmare. And by the way, you know fully well there's an old story that money is timid. If she started to pass the nightmare she's talking about, everybody who is truly successful would take their money and leave the country.
Yep.
They would just invest overseas.
Yep.
And we saw this before. I mean, Trump went through a cycle, as you remember, because you were there, where the amount of money he brought back from overseas was staggering because he made it more profitable to be in America than to be in Ireland. And so people did the rational thing. They went where the opportunity was. What she would do is drive all the opportunities overseas.
That, by the way, that repatriation of overseas money is now estimated at over $2 trillion. Newt, I want to talk about your column on RFK Jr. Got to take a quick break. We'll come right back. Please stay with me. Please, please, please. You wrote a great column on what the RFK endorsement means for Mr. Trump. Folks, we're talking to the great Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, by the way. His latest book, March to the Majority, The Real Story of the Republican Revolution. And he's been sponsoring this initiative, America's New Majority Project. And he did coin the phrase big government socialism, which I use all the time. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking to the great Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. His initiative is America's New Majority Project. His latest book, March to the Majority, The Real Story of the Republican Revolution. That's a good read, folks, by the by. Newt, you wrote a blockbuster column, Trump's endorsement by Kennedy and Gabbard signals the reform revolution that upends the old conservative-liberal divide. Tell us some more about this one, please.
Well, first of all, people who want to see the column can go to the New York Sun, which ran it. And I will tell you, what hit me the other day from Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s very aggressive speech denouncing the Democratic Party and saying that neither his father nor his uncle would be Democrats in the modern era, that we're really facing a profound shift. What you have is a corrupt establishment. We were talking about this earlier, where everybody takes care of each other, where the lobbyists are vital, and where you and I get ripped off every morning. And staff, in order to survive, will do virtually anything because their entire livelihood, their status, their income are all tied into the survival of this corrupt system. And so that's why you see the bitterness against Trump, because he is the first presidential candidate to effectively take on the old order. And what you're beginning to see with people like Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a migration towards Trump of people who are just fed up with the kind of sickness they see in the Washington system. And you see it in Chicago and in New York and in California. This is a system that seeks to pay off its allies with your money and then to use your money to force you to do the things that they want. And the result is people are increasingly against them and increasingly angry about it. And you're seeing more and more people move towards what I think is a new dividing line. In addition to the conservative-liberal division that came out of Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s, I think you're now seeing a reform versus corruption division, and everybody who is sick of the old order and who thinks that you really can't have America survive as a profoundly corrupt country, I think is going to migrate into this new reform movement, which makes it a very different kind of structure, which is why if you look at the two conventions, everybody who has ever been important in the Democratic Party was in Chicago because they're a coherent unit in favor of taking your money to pay each other off. The Republican convention had a remarkable absence of the old order. The people who used to be part of the system are now, many of them are never Trumpers. Many of them are uncomfortable being, in the new Republican Party. And on the other hand, you have working class Americans, small business Americans. You have this whole new coalition growing up, profoundly different than the old Republican Party.
You're right. The Trump-Kennedy alliance is a visible example of the emerging new reform movement. Ms. Gabbard is another example of someone who has experienced the ruthlessness of the old order. The Democrats weaponized against both Bob Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, it was astounding, first of all, that they would not provide Secret Service protection to Robert F. Kennedy when both his father and his uncle had been assassinated. And then it was even more astounding to discover that Tulsi Gabbard, who was a military officer, has been a member of Congress, is totally clear. She had been designated as a potential terrorist.
Gotta jump.
By Homeland Security. And
Newt
they were
Gingrich.
literally at TSA.
Newt Gingrich, thank you ever so much. Best to Ambassador Callista. Reform movement. I'm Kudlow, folks.